Brandis, COVID-19 cases are surging right now in some states, including California, Arizona, Texas, and Florida. What does that mean for Illinois' cautious reopening? Meanwhile, Congress demands answers on explosive reports that the White House was briefed on intelligence suggesting Russian operatives were putting bounties on the lives of American service members in Afghanistan. And joining us now with their perspectives on all of that and more are Congressman Rodney, a Republican representing Illinois' 13th district, which includes Taylorville and parts of Springfield. Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, a Democrat representing Illinois' 9th district, which includes parts of Chicago's north side and northern suburbs. And Congressman Krishnamoorthi, a Democrat representing Illinois' 8th district, which includes Elgin, Schaumburg, and Addison. And yesterday, the White House briefed Republicans about Russia allegedly putting bounties on American soldiers' heads. The Democrats were briefed this morning, and here's some reaction to the president denying he was briefed and questioning the veracity of the intelligence.
The president called this a hoax publicly. Nothing in the briefing that we have just received led me to believe it is a hoax.
The evidence is still being gathered, in essence, by the intelligence agencies. And if it's found out that this is true, then obviously there needs to be a pretty harsh response to that.
Congressman Krishnamoorthi, you were briefed on some of this intelligence suggesting that Russians put bounties on the heads of service members in Afghanistan. What did you learn from those briefings?
Well, I can't comment on the classified information that was shared with us, except what I will say is that if the allegations are true, then the president must condemn and then must take action with regard to the situation, because as you know, it's his #1 duty, or among his top priorities, to protect our national security and, of course, to protect our soldiers.
Congressman go ahead, Congresswoman Schakowsky.
Yeah, if I could, I spent 8 years on the Intelligence Committee, and the idea that the president was unaware of something as big as this is just really hard to swallow. This kind of accusation doesn't come every day. And if there's an intelligence report that confirmed that, it's just inconceivable that it would not get up to the President of the United States. Inconceivable.
Congressman Davis, do you believe the president that he wasn't aware of this intelligence and some of the other statements that the intelligence is not conclusive on this yet?
Well, I don't have any reason not to, and facts matter. Let's let the facts play out. We've got to determine if our intelligence agencies had any credible information. As my colleague, Mr. Kinzinger, said in your opening statement, we've got to make sure that we get to the bottom of this. We need to find out if it's been verified, if it was shared at any level within the intelligence community. I called for investigations and I called for answers, and we're still waiting for the facts to get those answers. And playing politics with our troops and putting them in political games is really not something that anybody out here in Washington should be doing.
Although, Congressman, multiple news outlets have confirmed these intelligence reports, is there action that you think should be taken against Russia if indeed they do prove to be true?
Oh, 100%. This administration has been harsher on Russia than previous administrations. There's no Russian reset button. We provided lethal aid under this administration to the Ukrainians when the previous administration provided blankets. We've put more sanctions on Russia in this administration than the previous administrations. I would assume that if this bears out, that Vladimir Putin or anybody with the GRU wanted to kill American troops and put bounties on their head, that they're going to be dealt with very harshly by this administration.
Congressman Krishnamoorthi, how does the House plan to investigate these allegations, and who do they plan to call to testify?
Well, within our House Intelligence Committee, we're going to be demanding answers from the DNI, Mr. Ratcliffe, as well as other members of the intelligence community. I think it's very important at this point that we take a bipartisan approach on this issue, which is that if the Russians are going to put a price on our troops' heads, we are going to deal with them very seriously. And unfortunately, the body language and the rhetoric coming from President Trump doesn't signal that. He doesn't even want to say that if this is true, regardless of whether I knew about it specifically 3 months ago or not, But if this is true, I am going to upgrade the Russians. I'm going to sanction the Russians. I'm going to do whatever it takes to prevent this from happening again, and then some. That is disturbing. And that follows a pattern of unfortunately cozying up to Vladimir Putin, who is not a friend of the United States.
Congresswoman Schakowsky, should Congress and the White House wait until there is apparent consensus in the intelligence community before taking action?
I think we need to begin an investigation. This is so serious. There seem to be reports of actual people who have been killed that may be the victims of this deal that Russia made. And so I think we have to start, and our intelligence community has to start right away. And the intelligence committee needs to have the full story.
Okay, let's move on to coronavirus. Today, Dr. Fauci warned of a potential 100,000 new cases per day and that a vaccine is still a long way off. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
I still think that one can say that I'm cautiously optimistic that we will have one or maybe more candidates of vaccines that could be available and be effective by the end of the year, the beginning of 2021.
Congressman Davis, with the EU announcing that it will be closed to travelers from the U.S. and a handful of other countries as coronavirus cases surge, a sign here that the efforts to contain it and get rid of it have failed.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a failure. I mean, we have a disease we're dealing with that nobody knew existed a year ago on Earth. You know, we have Dr. Fauci talking about a vaccine in less than a year of development of multiple vaccine possibilities. And we're doing what we can by learning on the fly how to deal with this disease. And clearly, there were those who didn't practice social distancing, didn't practice the proper procedures. We've seen a surge in certain areas in our nation, be it Florida, be it Arizona, California, and others. But still, we're seeing those being infected are in a less vulnerable age population, which is good, which still gives us the opportunity to treat those who this disease attacks the most. But we've got to be cautious. And I'm glad that we're being cautious in Illinois at this point, although downstate, where I'm from, we've reached the metrics that have been laid out by our governor weeks ago. And I'm glad we're beginning the slow reopening, and I certainly hope we can continue to see positive results.
All right, we want to talk more about this in a bit, but we're going to have to leave it there for now. We'll have more with our guests a little later in the show, including their thoughts on police reform and DACA, so please stay with us.
And now back to Paris with more from Illinois Congress members. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. Democrats and Republicans have competing police reform proposals that seem to be on a collision course in the wake of George Floyd's death and the recent civil unrest. Meanwhile, House Democrats vote to expand Obamacare as President Trump argues in court to do away with it. Joining us again are Congressman Rodney Davis, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi. I want to continue our discussion on COVID-19. Congresswoman Schakowsky, health experts say there's a short window to get this recent surge under control. Do you believe the country can get this under control and bend that curve again?
You know, to say that we're doing all we can couldn't be further from the truth. We have lacked national leadership to set clear, not just guidelines, but to require certain behaviors, to help the states who have been left totally on their own with testing and just handling the virus, especially in nursing homes. And we've actually been worse than no help at all, because the president has been signaling the opposite of what we should be doing and holding rallies. I am very worried, even in Illinois and in Chicago. I wasn't home this weekend. I was here because we've been having so many meetings in Washington. But I understand that the bars were full, that people were on top of each other, no social distancing, or at least in some places, and that people were not wearing masks. And I want to tell you, unless we hear different and we get some services provided by the federal government, I really don't know how long this would take. And to say we're doing well, compare us to every other country, and we're just not doing well. The United States is doing worse than any of the rich countries in the world.
It does appear there are bipartisan calls now for wearing masks. Congressman Krishnamoorthi, should there be another round of stimulus to help people affected by the economy right now?
Yes, I think so. I think that there has to be help for families who are really suffering right now. There has to be help for businesses. The PPP program was a start. The Paycheck Protection Program was a start, but there were problems, and businesses continue to need relief because demand for their goods and services is not near their pre-pandemic levels. And then finally, we need a lot more assistance for testing and contact tracing and even personal protective equipment, which is still in shortage in numerous parts of the country. And we need regulation of the testing markets. I'm chairman of the subcommittee on economic and consumer policy, and we led an investigation of the antibody testing market. Unfortunately, hundreds of junk tests have flooded the market. Millions of people are taking these antibody tests. And we did pressure the FDA to regulate this market, but they're going too slowly. And unfortunately, it's being handled with the type of incompetence that the rest of the response to the pandemic has unfortunately modeled. So we have a long ways to go.
I want to move on to health care debates right now. In the midst of this pandemic, House Democrats just approved an expansion of Obamacare while the Trump administration argues before the Supreme Court to do away with it. Let's hear what House Speaker Nancy Pelosi had to say.
We are enhancing the Affordable Care Act. The president is overturning it at a time when we have over 125,000 Americans who have died.
Congressman Davis, the president has promised an alternative, has promised to keep coverage of pre-existing conditions, but is there any serious proposal to cover folks with pre-existing conditions if Obamacare is done away with?
Well, I love how my colleagues like to rewrite history. We had a proposal. It passed the House of Representatives in the last Congress, would have lowered premiums, would have protected everybody with pre-existing condition coverage. And that pre-existing condition coverage is personal to me. My wife's a 21-year cancer survivor. And that's something that we Republicans put into the bill that was passed that 0 Democrats voted for. As a matter of fact, it failed by 1 vote in the Senate. So we put forth our version. But the Democrats run the House. And they talked about fixing our broken healthcare system that's still leaving 60 million Americans behind. And instead of actually sitting down and passing common sense bills like my bill that would open up the ACA for 30 days, but also extend COBRA coverage subsidies so that families ravaged by COVID can still keep the doctors that they're used to working with if they're going through similar situations that my wife did 21 years ago. But instead of calling a bill like that, they put a messaging bill on the floor that everybody knows has 0 chance of becoming law, just to fulfill a campaign promise, because in over a year and a half, they have yet to do anything to help those 60 million Americans that don't have coverage or can't afford to use the coverage that they have.
Congressman Chakouty, is there some sort of compromise with Republicans on expansion of health care? As I mentioned, the House Democrats did pass an expansion of some tenets of Obamacare.
Yeah, I have never heard such misinformation about this. Everyone knows that the Republicans have voted like 60 times to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which actually did not only protect people with pre-existing conditions, kept our kids on the family policy, have made prescription drugs more affordable. That's what our new bill does. That is just ridiculous. It is the White House that has gone to the Supreme Court and said, just get rid of it. At the same time as the Democrats are working every day and have been through the Obama administration and through the Trump administration to expand the benefits. Did you know that in Illinois, women of color are 7 times more likely to die in childbirth-related instances? And so we have in this bill a plan to address these kinds of disparities. They should just vote for this bill.
I want to move on to police reform quickly. Congressman Krishnamoorthi, a Republican-led effort in the Senate, a Democratic-led effort in the House. In your mind, what is wrong with the effort in the Senate?
Well, unfortunately, although I commend Senator Tim Scott for trying to do something with regard to the police reform issue, it was woefully inadequate in the end, because it doesn't do what is required to meet the magnitude of the problem. Our House measure bans chokeholds, ends no-knock warrants, It also establishes a national registry for police misconduct, and it requires national heightened standards for police training.
And Congress, I'm sorry to cut you off there. Congressman Rodney Davis, in the few seconds we have left, in your mind, what is wrong with the House-led proposal?
Well, it's a travesty, first of all, that Tim Scott's bill wasn't even allowed to be debated in the Senate. This is an African-American Republican senator who's faced racial profiling, and the Democrats, including our two senators, wouldn't even allow that bill to be debated. That's frustrating. There's room for compromise, but let's just not go in and begin to ban police techniques and also qualified immunity at a time where we can't sit down and come up with bipartisan solutions. There was no attempt to try and come together in a bipartisan way to actually address about 80% of the issues that we all agree on that need to be addressed when it comes to data collection. But for the Democrats to say we've got to get rid of qualified immunity, otherwise bad cops will be able to do the same thing that happened to George Floyd, that's wrong. That's why Derek Chauvin, the man who murdered George Floyd, is being charged with murder.
My thanks to Congressman Rodney Davis, Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, and Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi.